Well, welcome to this series of looking at bodies, I suppose, in 19th century France, which I've called Seeing Through Clothes, and you will see indeed why this title is particularly apt. At the Salon, as you know, the Salon was the great exhibition which was held at this time yearly in Paris to foreground all of the great paintings of the time. And you have to remember that millions of people, at least 1 million people, went through this exhibition. It makes the audiences that we have for blockbusters very small indeed. So this was a major event in Paris. And in the room marked M, there was the painting of Manet. This is his follow-up to the Déjeuner sur l'Herbe, and it is Olympia. His painting caused such a commotion that it had to be moved from about a bit above eye level right up high, because people were striking it with their umbrellas, people were spitting at it. It was causing an extraordinary commotion, something that we can't imagine art, developing in our day. So I want to actually look at what was going on, and there is something here that I want to explore that I haven't explored before. So those of you who have been when I've talked about this particular painting, bear with me. So there are a number of things that really distressed people. The first thing is that you actually have someone who is, the painter is not obeying the idea of the difference between the naked and the nude. Now, the naked female form had started to dominate French art. It had taken over dramatically from the male nude. And of course, the naked female body was perfectly okay to see it, so long as it was encased in a narrative story, mythology or history, or encased in high moral values, because art at this time was supposed to be something which elevated. It wasn't something that was just a visual experience. It wasn't something theoretically which titillated you. You went to see art because it was an important part of your sort of moral structure. Well, what Manet has emphasised here, that this isn't a nude, a naked body incarnating eternal values, but simply a naked woman, right? So this is clearly a woman who has taken off her clothes. And he has emphasised this by leaving the shoes on, the bracelet, the flower in the hair, and so on. So this is clearly someone who has removed these clothes for a purpose. So, in other words, she moves from the realm of the eternal into the realm of the individual. In other words, into the realm of the modern, into a time which people can identify with. Indeed, she is a person whom we would recognise. She is a common prostitute. And this, of course, then suddenly all of the facades about looking at art fall away, and you're just simply looking, or as the French would say, rinsing your eye, with a naked body. So this was considered then scandalous in many ways. The other thing which was rather scandalous was that there's no reference in other paintings that we'll see to pubic hair or no pubic hair. And I'm very sorry about this, Colin. We've got one man here. So I'm going to actually keep it quite nice. You don't have to worry. In fact, chic is covering over her genital area, so you actually can't see. And in fact, you're not even sure what the heck she's doing. In fact, there have been an awful lot of sort of PhDs written on that particular hand. So that was actually the first thing. You know, we have now consumable flesh. The second thing is that she's not at all behaving according to the way in which a woman of that time, of the middle of the 19th century, should be behaving. This is a time, as you'll see, women's behaviour was carefully coded, and women had certain identities. They were pious, clearly she wasn't. They were submissive, they were domesticated, and virtuous. All right, so she misses out on virtuous, pious, probably domesticated if you look at the sheets, but particularly on submissiveness. And she's not submissive in the sense that she's looking right back at the viewer. She's not at all showing that she's ashamed of her nakedness. So were these things enough? Well, no, there was more, as they say in the advertisements. There was also the problem of the way in which it was painted. The way in which this is painted without chiaroscuro. And in other words, this balancing of surfaces with the light. And this also was supposed to show the superiority of the Renaissance, and the Renaissance represented all these high ideals in art. So what the heck was this fellow doing? So there were cartoons that were appearing in the press, making this woman look half masculine. Here she's called the ebony worker. People thought her flesh looked as though it was decaying on the morgue block. But in actual fact, all of these things really weren't what was shocking. What was incredibly shocking was her shape. Now, it is not a gendered shape. What you have here is a female form, right? A female body, quite clearly. She's not male, as you can see, but gender, of course, is something which is socially constructed, and it was constructed out of all of these ideas of piousness, virtue, and submissiveness. And she is not showing the correct shape of the gendered body at the time. And women at this time were confined and pushed into role models literally by the shape of their corset and by tight lacing. So that by the time she had reached possibly this age of probably about 23 or 24, she should have, if she conformed to the ideal of a woman, the real woman, real bourgeois woman, should have shown that shape of a narrowed waist, the breast pushed far apart, and sort of her hips flaring out. Well, she doesn't in this way. She has no waist at all, really. She has quite a thick torso, she has thick legs, and her breasts, even though they're high, they're not thrust apart in the way in which they should be. And I just want to read a quote from a figure, at least a book which deals with this idea of the gendering of the body, called Figure and Flesh. And it's very important for the rest of the lecture. Modernity produced its own image of the body. According to the dictates of science and philosophy, modern men and women were expected to look dramatically different from one another. For the 19th century mind, a masculine woman or feminine man represented an unnatural aberration, a grotesque distortion of preordained set of distinctions that were rooted in biology, decreed by nature, and endorsed by the complex organisation of sexual and social behaviour that characterised modern society. If men and women were to occupy their prescribed roles, then they had to look their parts, inhabiting those social fictions as if they were either inevitable or acquired without effort. Appearances testified to the maintenance of social order based on visible distinctions. If its boundaries were transgressed, chaos could ensue. All right? So the modern body is therefore a gendered body, moulded, modelled and ornamented, and it's the body which is going to sort of bear the burden of these distinctions. So this really then was what maybe people couldn't actually articulate what they were finding shocking, but this indeed was what it was. This was a natural woman, someone who is not tamed by society and therefore is capable of anything, as indeed prostitutes were at this time, or considered, because of the development of science and the interest in syphilis. Now, I just wanted to look at, some of you from the Spain tour will remember this, a painting by Goya, The Clothed Maja. Now, she clearly, in fact, corsets, as we'll see, originate in Spain. Here, of course, she is exhibiting the gendered body, all right? The cinched waist, the unnaturally cinched waist, the hips, and the breasts, which are put very, very far apart. Now, the same year, he actually painted the naked Maja, which was considered also shocking later on. The Spanish Inquisition, which was still working in 1860, had it removed from show, and even when it was on a postage stamps commemorating the life of Goya and sent to the United States banned the stamps from entering. All right, so what we have here then is a woman who is naked, and so you get this erotically charged nude, which is quite different from a nude that doesn't have that shape. That this nude doesn't represent any ideas or history or mythology. She is simply a naked woman, someone who's taken off her clothes and is lying there invitingly. And her nakedness doesn't even have to be shown by attributes or pieces of clothing lying around, as it did in the Déjeuner sur l'herbe. It's her body itself which shows this. Do you see that? All right. Also, there's this idea of women, of course, not having any pubic hair or hair under their arms, and no one actually knows, sorry about this, Colin, whether people actually did go in for epilation, you know, had the original Brazilians at the time, or, you know, did they still maintain hair on their body? Probably not, because hair was supposed to be an attribute of masculinity. Men had hair coming out of every follicle, you know, a bit like Buddy Franklin, and sort of to sort of prove their masculinity. So then it really is sort of the body and appearances do matter, and the constrained body, particularly the constrained, confined, moulded female form, is going to be very important in this idea of the struggle of civilization against the forces of nature, right? And so it is no surprise that at the 1900 World Exhibition in Paris on the Place de la Concorde, we actually have a statue of La Parisienne, the Parisian. Now, normally you would expect, if you're going to have a female figure dominating a gate, you would imagine it would be either the Virgin Mary, as you did with the cathedrals, of course, or in a republic, maybe not the Virgin Mary, but certainly Marianne, who represents the French Republic. But no, we have La Parisienne, who is the epitome of the fashionable woman. And fashionable means that she wears her corset, that she is incredibly upright, literally, because the corset literally holds you upright, and therefore you are morally upright, you are encased, there is a separation between you and the outside world, you are as unnatural looking as possible. Also, of course, it is homage to what has now become a catchword of French civilization, the idea of chic. All right? Chic, which is a word which was developed by the demi-mondaines, or the courtesans of the time, and indeed the Parisienne was one of the great exports of French culture. It is through the grands magasins, the big department stores and their catalogues, that this image of the perfect woman who is confined, moulded, ornamented and extraordinarily chic is diffused throughout the world. But there's more actually going on here. If we actually look at what were these great exhibitions representing. Well, first of all, what we have here in the 1900 exhibition is you have La Rue des Nations, the Street of Nations, where every country in Europe actually took its iconic building and built it out of papier-mâché along the Seine. So you had miniature Westminster Abbeys. Here, of course, you have, for Italy, it's represented by St. Mark's. And so, in other words, what Paris is doing is situating itself as the superior form of European civilization, where all the others can only come as papier-mâché facsimiles of themselves in this extraordinary city, the City of Light, which was developed out of Haussmann's construction. So that's the first thing that they're foregrounding. The second thing that they're foregrounding is, of course, technology. This is why they actually had these exhibitions, to sort of show how France was way ahead. In fact, it wasn't, but anyway, that was the idea, way ahead of other countries. Germany, of course, wasn't. Germany was arming up and was about to bombard them with the cannons which were exhibited here. But it was also foregrounding the time when France was at the peak of its colonial expansion. And so, as well as these facsimiles of European cities, you had artificially grouped little collections or villages of primitive peoples. They had come to Australia and got some Aborigines, they'd gone to North Africa and had different parts of North Africa stuck together. Well, they're all black, they're all from different tribes, it doesn't matter, just get in there and do your basket weaving. And this was an extremely important aspect of the exhibitions. It was to show the superiority of European civilization over the primitive first, well, what they're now called, of course, the first civilizations. And this was in relation to Darwinian theory, which had become popular, and in fact social Darwinism had evolved. taken from the idea of, natural selection, survival of the fittest. So that if you have, on the one hand, a nation which can exhibit such extraordinary technological and architectural exhibits, next to these primitive people fiddling around with their didgeridoos and something, this was proof of the scientific theory that Darwin had put forward. So you look back at these primitive people, and what are they? Well, things that are natural are people who are naked, all right? And so here we have these on the esplanade in front of the Musée d'Orsay. Now you actually have 4 statues which represent the 4 continents, or 5 statues actually, because they discovered Australia by that stage. And all of them are naked except for, of course, Europe. Europe is clothed, all right? The idea of clothing shows that one is no longer in the state of nature, whereas you actually have Australasia here represented by this always female figures. All right, and as you can see, she has the non-gendered body. All right, she has her breasts are falling down, gravity has struck. She doesn't have much of a waist, and she certainly isn't that cinched, tight-laced silhouette which was represented on the pedestal of the main gate. So this is the female cinched in form, literally on a pedestal, the Parisienne on the pedestal, which was a kind of benevolent sexism. All right, we have to put women on a pedestal because they're very useful. They have much higher moral standards than men. They're going to civilise men, but poor little things, they're so feeble. We actually have to open doors and so on for them. All right, so feminists get very upset about this sort of negative, what they think of benevolent sexism. I don't mind having people open doors. Right, but that's anyway. So this then brings us then very much to the attitudes that develop, particularly during the Second Empire, and which have become more and more prominent by the end of the 19th century, by the time you actually get that sort of apotheosis, more or less, of the clothed, corseted female elegant figure. So we need to look then at this definition of separate spheres, which develops particularly from the 1840s onwards, is pushed very much forward during the Second Empire and develops, as I said, further at the end. So the separate spheres is based on the idea that it comes at the time, of course, of the Industrial Revolution, where men and women now work in different spheres. I mean, originally many people in the lower bourgeoisie worked together. Men now go out to work, women still remain at home. But it's especially, as we'll see, the time of the rise of the merchant classes of the bourgeoisie. So the separate spheres are based, again, on this idea of women as pious, virtuous, submissive and domestic. But also on a cleavage along the lines of men are strong, women are weak, men are intelligent, women are intuitive, men are emotionally strong, women are hysterical, women are sort of frivolous, men are intellectual. I mean, in fact, if you look at all the positive natures that our civilization and society puts forward, it's all on the male side, and then the negative, the other, is female. And I don't really think that we've changed this very much at all. Just we've eased the discourse, but there's not much difference. Anyhow, the representations in art of this are very, very interesting. A lot of you have seen this image before, but I think it's worth going over. This idea then of a woman as having to be as far from nature as possible, as far from the primitive, as far from that low level of the natives as possible. And what really distinguishes these people is their lack of naturalness, the lack of their bodily structure, which echoes their sensitivity, which is also supposed to be so far from the natives in their village. So artificiality is the outstanding sign of civilization, of sophistication, and of purity, and of piousness. So the more artificially you are dressed, the more desirable you are, all right? So this also shows your virtue, your virginity, if need be, before marriage, but also your lack of interest in that sort of thing after marriage. All right, So this painting actually shows you very, very clearly this woman is in an artificial setting, all right? These winter gardens which develop at the time of the Second Empire, where plants that normally grow in winter now can, in summer now can be grown in winter. So in other words, man or society now can turn everything upside down, even sort of the natural causes of selection. And so in an artificial selection, in an artificial setting, you have this extremely artificially produced person. All right, now if you look straight up from, she is hobbled by her dress. She can't move because of the corset. She would, you know, the incredible number of coils of extra hair that she'd have on her head. And when you actually go up from here, it looks like a vase, and the flowers are coming out of the vase, and her head is averted. And this, of course, is because women's brains were seen to be so small it was hardly worth worrying about them, all right? And it was seriously, an intelligent woman was something that was really a worry, you know. Even in my day, I remember my mother used to say to me, you know, for heaven's sake, you know, you'll never get married, men don't like clever girls, you know. Seriously, I'm sure a lot of you can identify with that. All right, so what we have then is the difference now between these ideas of femininity, right? The bourgeois woman, all right, then is someone who can't move, possibly because she's hobbled by her skirts. She therefore can't work. So in other words, she's simply a decoration of her husband's wealth and status. All right, and she guards the boudoir, she guards the inner parts of society. On the outsides of society, of course, since women are only maternal and not interested in sex, you've got all of these sex workers, literally, who are also the European equivalent of that very low primitive level of society, right? Sexuality and dirt and all of these things are seen to be part of the lower order, which have to be banished by discipline and artifice. All right, so here you get the opposite. Here you get women who are simply naked. All right, they've taken part of their clothes off, but they're not exactly what you'd call sort of salaciously interesting, are they? And the faces, of course, show that they are belonging to a lower level of evolution. As you can see, the faces look very much like sort of monkeys, very simiesque. And they're all the same, basically. And they also don't show any sort of gendering either, because really they're unnatural women, aren't they? You know, they're not the ideal bourgeois woman. Now, this then was this time when the outside spaces of society are taken over by men, right? This is where poor men sort of, you know, risk their souls out there in the marketplace and come back, fortunately, to this woman who is so pure that she will elevate his thoughts with her babble and so on, all right? So I just thought that's an interesting, you get very much this idea of the exterior space. Now, women, of course, are relegated not just to artificiality in their dressing so that they can't do anything except be extremely gendered, but they're also pushed into rivalry with each other, because the only form of validation that a woman has is through the eyes of a man, and therefore there is this intense, this is even called the rival. So you get these two women tarted up in exactly the same sort of inhibiting outfits, vying for the attention of this fellow here who doesn't look particularly interested. I don't know whether this is their mother or not. Then, of course, over here you get this little flirtatious sort of coquetry going on with her trying to attract his attention, but at the same time keeping him at a distance. So this whole idea of yes you can, yes you can't sort of idea of this play with boundaries that you had to, you know, learn how to flirt. You know, that's what you have to do when you're a female, I suppose. All right, so this then, it develops now into a form which is marketed in the fashion plates of the time. And so this is really what women need to be. Now, you said they're cloned, basically. They've all got exactly the same sort of hairdos. They've got exactly the same stances. At least in fashion plates now you get these silly things with people sort of looking over there or sort of waving or something. But here they're all doing exactly the same thing because there was only a limited number of gestures that were admissible for a woman. And we'll look at that later. Besides, you couldn't move very much because you couldn't really turn properly on your corset. All right, so they are incredibly confined, right from the head down to the neck, to the bosom, down to the waist, the gloves, all of the body parts are confined and stereotyped. Now, this image of this particular type of woman starts out, as we'll see, with the bourgeoisie, but becomes a general view which, with the development in the 1850s in Paris of the great department stores, is an ideal which can be bought by the lower classes. And so even while you've got women who do have to work, such as the little maids and other people, they end up aping this ideal of the bourgeois gendered body and actually try and work wearing these corsets and so on. And of course this idea of feminine and chic, Parisian chic, is now marketed throughout the world in the catalogues sent out by the Grand Magasin, and particularly takes on in America. It's also, and this is actually one thing I won't spend much time on, but it's very interesting, is the development of photography at the time. It was very hard before then to actually send out multiple images of yourself or of a fashion, because someone would have to paint them. But at this time you get the invention of lithography, therefore you get the catalogues being sent out, but also the invention of cheap photography. These were the carte de visite, the visiting cards that you would have done of yourself, and you'd have them done often in different poses. But for the first time, this image of the fashionable self could not just be marketed by the shops, but also sent out by you could send this image to other people. All right, so what I want to look at now really is, the development of why is it that Paris actually is the epitome of fashion, and it still is. I mean, it still is. If you say you've bought something in Paris, people sort of fall down on the floor. You don't sort of say that got it from the equivalent of Coles or something. It's French, it must be good, which you don't get with the same attitude to Italian or something bought in London. Well, I don't think, maybe it's just me. Anyway, at the time of the court of Louis XIV, you do get the preeminence of the French court throughout Europe. But it's really with Marie Antoinette that you get the development of French fashion as being the fashion which is the one that all people in all courts will adopt. Now, Marie Antoinette, of course, was married when she was, I think she was 14, and the French court were worried about, she was an Austrian after all, but I mean, by definition, French kings married foreigners because marriages were related to treaty organisations. People didn't marry people because they fancied them, it was because it was good for their country. They were still a bit worried. The Austrians weren't known for their fashion sense, so they sent out dolls showing what French fashions were like, but Maria Antonia arrived at the French border wearing clothes that didn't look French. So part of the protocol of her becoming a French Dauphine, she was stripped of her clothes, right down till she had nothing on, and taken over by the French ladies in waiting, and progressively from the underclothes upward constructed as a French woman with French clothes. All right, so this was importance of appearance even in the 18th century. Now, she becomes Marie Antoinette instead of Marie Antonia. She is forbidden to speak anything except French, and from then on she's going to represent the French royalty, particularly when she will become queen. Now, for many reasons that those of you who've been to my lectures on Marie Antoinette know, she refused actually to play her part. One of the reasons she was fairly headstrong was her personality, but also there were problems at the court. Her husband hadn't consummated her marriage for 7 years, and she might not have been interested, but she was getting this huge pressure on her to produce an heir. That's all a queen was supposed to do. So she was left looking a little bit silly. There were all of these different power groups who hated her at the court. The king's aunts disliked her. the king's, Louis XIV's mistress hated her, and so on. So she wants to be her own woman, and she decides to do this through clothes. And the first thing that she refuses to do is to wear the corset, which was a kind of an iron corset, which was called le grand corps, which was only worn by aristocracy and which had developed actually out of the Spanish court wear. Now this is a Velasquez. This would have been worn even by this very, very little princess here. Very stays made often out of metal with a basque or something down the front which flattened out the chest. Now Marie Antoinette absolutely refused to wear this and had to finally be convinced, you know, even the Austrian ambassador was worried about her corset. You know what I mean? It wasn't just something that a woman made a decision about. Refusing to wear a corset was refusing to play the role of the queen. So eventually they get over that one. And then for a while she actually conforms, and she will wear what is considered normal royal dress at the time. Royalty was supposed to spend lavishly, right? That wasn't really the reason why people criticised Marie Antoinette. They were supposed to look different in a time when materials weren't mass manufactured. They had to be made by hand, and therefore incredible amounts of material in extraordinary colours showed prestige, difference and rank. And the populace would expect their sovereigns to be able to shine on the European court scene. So here she is with this exaggeration of yards and yards and yards of material, which had to, of course, hang off a corset. Now, this is what these paniers looked like. It was very difficult. When you sat down, you had to sit with your legs out, your knees out, which of course us nice girls have been told not to do. You had to push your knees out because you had to keep that piece of material taut between your legs. All right. So all of these clothing have a huge effect on gestures and posture, as we'll see. Now, Marie Antoinette becomes interested in fashion, and she's criticised very much because she goes to Paris, right? Remember, she's at Versailles. She starts to frequent a low-born dressmaker, Rose Bertin, who eventually comes out to see her at Versailles once or twice a week, to the chagrin of the aristocracy, who feel that they don't have enough access to Marie Antoinette. And there she is with this, you know, low-born couturière. And it's through Rose Bertin that Marie Antoinette begins this fall into fashion, and indeed it is a fall, because fashion basically means that you are changing with the times, and the whole point of monarchy, the absolute divine right of kings, was something which was eternal and immobile. So therefore, by changing the fashions all the time, you departed from this and showed sort of vulnerability in this ideal. So because she changes her clothing, she changes colours, she changes materials and changes hairdressers all the time, she actually, this lithograph of her as the Queen of France and Navarre, is taken by fashion magazines, and she literally becomes a fashion plate. So you get the Queen, you can visibly is the Queen, and her fashions are now used to sell styles to the middle classes. And the same thing happens with her hairdressers. Now, some of you have sat through this. She develops these extraordinary things called poufs, which actually represent events that are going on. So you had a hairdress. This one was representing the sinking of the Alabama, relating to the Civil War in America. And so to celebrate this, she actually puts a ship on her head with cannons and little sailors and all the rest of it. And so you could not get a better example of someone now caught up in the day-to-day, like the news of the day, and representing it. She was supposed to be in an eternal realm away from all of that. Other people could look at this, but not the Queen. But the final stroke comes when she asked her favourite her favourite artist, who's another woman, Elisabeth Vigelbrun, to portray her in this particular outfit. Now, the Queen had actually developed this habit of going to the little Trianon, which you know of, which was at the bottom of the gardens of Versailles, where she could escape court ritual. Right? She hated it. She was her own woman there, and she dressed according to Rousseau's ideas of going back to nature, of simplicity. And so there she literally gets rid of her corset. This is a non-corseted body, and the extraordinary regal robes which show prestige, elegance and rank have been dismissed for the fashionable gall, which was also being worn by the Duchess of Devonshire, who's a great mate, on the other side of the Channel. Now, when this would have been all right, but the Trianon becomes associated with all of these stories about Marie Antoinette. She was there having it off with her brother-in-law, and if she wasn't with him, she was having it off with her ladies-in-waiting. She was spending incredible amounts of money. The real problem was, of course, that she was invisible there. The courtiers didn't have access to her, and so all of these libels start to circulate about the sins of the Queen. She was at the same time a lesbian, a nymphomaniac, and so on. And the dress that she was supposed to wear there symbolised this unqueenliness. Now, the Queen was supposed to simply be the kind of conduit for the next generation of royalty. She had no real status in herself. It was usually the King's mistress that did all of the spending. But here we've got Marie Antoinette claiming individuality, right, and the spending. So when she actually asked to be portrayed like this, and the painting is hung in the salon next to paintings that portray wondrous, ideas of high-minded morality, Virginia killing herself because she's been raped and all of these things, you've suddenly got a picture of the Queen, and a very intimate picture. You haven't got her full length, you go in halfway, and she seems to be looking down at us. There's no attributes, no royal attributes. Normally a queen showed herself with a picture of the king or a crown to show that she was, submissive in relation to that. No, we just get a portrait of moi in my fashionable dress. So this then is the Queen, not just representing the dress of sinfulness and of that, but also the Queen appearing as an individual. And this really was one of the last sort of stones of the Ancien Regime which was going to be brought down. The Queen was not an individual. She belonged to the state. She belonged to the country. But if the Queen can flout this and try and appear as an individual, well, the King's just an individual. He can be removed as well. Do you see this sort of implication behind it? There was an absolute outrage. She's also there with her favourite attribute, which is a rose instead of some kind of household thing. And, of course, this was seen as, she's the Austrian as well. Well, they realised very quickly their mistake, and she was quickly repainted with her in regal dress. She's still got the rose, but now she's in a sylvan glade. She's in the gardens of the palace, and she now looks regal. She now holds her rank, all right? She now has that gendered and state-style body with which the French could identify. Right? Because not only that, she was also accused of undermining French trade, because everyone knew that muslin was imported by the English. So she couldn't win really on any front. So down comes the monarchy. I mean, I'm not saying that the monarchy falls because of the dress that Marie Antoinette wore. It was really a symbol of the way times had changed. And so at the time of the Revolution, this idea of getting rid of the artificial aspects of the court, there's a kind of return to the basic values of humanity, liberty, freedom, fraternity, and that literally is fraternity. Women really weren't included in that. They still were supposed to be at home producing the next generation of patriots. All right, but however, in the field of fashion, there is this return to the values of Greece and Rome, and so we have this extraordinarily contrast where you get that gaulle or that chemise, and in fact that's something I should have said to you really, is that this actually was also identified as a chemise. Chemise is the basic undergarment that women wore under all of this paraphernalia. And people who didn't understand that this was actually a gaulle dress thought that it was actually the Queen appearing in her underwear. All right, so this chemise then, which was so scandalous, has now become de rigueur at the time of the Revolution and just after the Revolution and into the Napoleonic years. So here you have, they've done away with corsets, theoretically, all right, no high heels, bare feet, no wigs, simple locks, very little jewellery. It's sort of the body unadorned, the litheness of the body which is supposed to appear. In actual fact, of course, you couldn't do this. If you look at all of the paintings of our friend Josephine and others, she actually wears something to support her breast. But in the first instance, it was worn without any form of corset. But the corset gradually comes back in, starting almost out as a kind of brassiere style. Now, this was an extraordinarily sheer thing. This, I think this is so funny. This is the English sort of making fun of them. You can see. Now, what is important here is that people did die of pneumonia, of course. I mean, they used to dampen these cloths so that they'd cling more. It's a bit like the sort of damp T-shirt sort of thing. Now, but it was, however, difficult to get round in the middle of winter like this. And so women did develop flesh-coloured tights to go underneath, all right? However, they weren't joint at the crotch. You don't get crotched underwear until the end of the 19th century, all right? And here we have another one. Oh, my goodness, just as well he can't see. You know, this is even the dog's getting an eyeful here. But there are different types of styles that come in. This style of simplicity, but it's a political style again. These are women who had their hair cropped as they would have had they gone to the guillotine. All right, and so this becomes a very smart hairdo, having cropped hair at the back. So this is deliberately against the idea of the wig, of the poufs of Marie Antoinette, which where you get the idea of let them eat cake. In fact, it didn't say that at all, but it's because she was using so much flour for her hair. Well, I'm going to skip over the times from about 20 or 30 years during the Restoration era, because we could be here all night. I want to sort of I want to actually go to really one of the main turning points, which of course is the Second Empire, which develops in 1848 out of the 1848 Revolution. Prince Napoleon Bonaparte comes back as Prince President, and 2 years later, in a coup d'etat, crowns himself as the Emperor Napoleon III. And it is he who is going to recreate Paris. Now, I'm not going to go into this with you. You all know this, but there are a couple of things which we need to look at. The city itself is constrained very much the way the female body is constrained. It is an artificially created city according to the plans of Napoleon and Haussmann. All right, it's not a city which has been allowed to grow naturally, like London or the human body. It is one which has the boulevards cut across, you have ring roads put in, you have artificially large buildings. It's very, very similar in this idea of constriction, modelling, ornamentation, as it is with the body. And this modelled city, which is going to be I suppose the stage for the bourgeoisie, is dominated by men. And it's dominated by men in black of the merchant class, who are extremely anxious to maintain their rank, all right, because it's earning money, which is in itself not a particularly prestigious occupation, as opposed to the aristocrats who did nothing. And so one needs to maintain one's rank, and so one is going to need facades on the buildings in which one lives, but also a facade in your family, which will be that of the wife, all right? So this idea of the gendered spheres is going to become even more acute, and the female body is going to be used as a showcase for social success, as opposed to all those other moral attributes that we've spoken about. So here we then have women in their right place. The boulevards, of course, now with their lighting, with their width, with their footpaths and transport, are the ideal place for one to show oneself off. And so we have these paintings here by Béraud, admittedly at the end of the century, with a woman here being looked at by a man, and she's looking at us because we're admiring her, and she, of course, is admiring her as well. So there's this idea of showing off and visuality, which is extremely important at this time. And of course, it follows this extraordinary line that we will look at in corsetry during the end of the 19th century. Well, very quickly, I want to sort of look at Napoleon III is refused. He wants the hand of some princesses in Europe, and they sort of aren't interested really in buying back into the Bonaparte family. And so he makes a very savvy move, and in fact he is a very savvy man, and he marries someone for her good looks, for her photogenic good looks, which very much reminds me of Kate Middleton. Whatever she's like as a person, one of the reasons she's where she is because she photographs extremely well. If you look at, she belongs to these pairs of sisters who have been, touted to marry royalty. If you think of Jackie Kennedy and her sister who becomes Princess Radiswell. And this reminds us of Eugénie, who was a great beauty, a Spanish beauty, and she and her sister were taken round the courts of Europe until they got suitable suitors. Her sister ends up, Paquita marries the Duke of Alba, who is probably the most powerful man in Spain, and of course she manages to snare Napoleon III. I think it's quite an interesting thing, this idea of touting your daughters around. So she is now given the role or her body in many ways is given the role of exemplifying the values of the Second Empire. So first of all, it's this development of visuality, of monumentality, and it is she who implements the idea of the crinoline. Now the crinoline, I think, in dress is the same as the buildings that are put up by Napoleon III. The opera, which is huge, like a meringue, like a crinoline skirt, with layers of gilt and gold and marble all over it, just the way skirts were. Now, I think these are really funny. I think this one's even better. This idea of the skirt is huge. There are several reasons behind this. First of all, what does it mean in relation to women? The sort of inviolability, the untouchability of the pure woman. All right, you cannot get near her. So when she is not just in her own house, in the boudoir, when she is out and about, she is literally untouchable because of the size of her skirts. But also, the bigger the skirts, the more material which is used, and this is to advertise the silk industries of Lyon for all the other countries. So therefore, it's a kind of patriotic duty to wear the crinoline. Now, the crinoline develops out of crin, meaning horsehair, which meant that you had petticoats made of stiff horsehair, and then more and more and more petticoats, which was very difficult to wear. But because this is the time of the Industrial Revolution, you get, not steel, would it be steel? Yes, steel hoops, which are developed into a kind of a cage. So you get women actually in a cage. This is the way in which it's put on. So therefore you have the chemise underneath and the cage is strapped on over this. Now this meant in actual fact that women were to some degree liberated in their movements, because with the petticoats you could hardly shuffle along. They were very, very heavy, they got damp, they got smelly, whereas now you've actually virtually got nothing underneath, maybe a chemise and a petticoat to cover your modesty, but basically a lot of air and the lightness of the cage. Well, lightness, I don't know, but in comparison, and it can take more and more material. Now, it was, of course, dangerous. Here you've got, these caricatures of people being taken up. Some people did get blown off cliffs. If you stood, well, you would, the wind goes under you. And the other thing, of course, was that it occurred that people burnt to death. They wouldn't realise how close they were to the fire, and their material on their dress would catch fire, and they couldn't get them out of it in time. They'd suffer terrible burns. So it wasn't without its problems. Now, I just wanted to show the connection now then with one's dress as its political dimension as well. This is taken from The Kill by Zola, and I think some of you will have read this. I hope some of you have read this. And it talks about the main character, Renée, and she makes a great entrance at a ball which is being held for her brother-in-law, who's about to make a great speech in Parliament where he wants to get votes for the redevelopment of the city of Paris, all right? And so in sweeps Renée. Or at the next day at the ministry ball, the beautiful Madame Saccard was wondrous. Worms. Now, Worms is actually supposed to be his worth, all right? You know, the great couturier. She's always in debt. This is what happened with women. You know, this further exemplifies the stupidity of women. And accepted the 50,000 francs on account, and she emerged from her financial straits with the laughter of convalescence. Right, now, when she traversed the reception rooms in her great dress of rose fay, that's silk, with its long Louis XIV train edged with deep white lace, there was a murmur. Men jostled to see each other to see her, and those who were her friends bowed low with a discreet smile of appreciation, doing homage to those beautiful shoulders so well known to all official Paris and looked upon as the firm pillars of the empire. All right, so this idea of fashion. She had bared her bosom with so great a contempt for the looks of others, she walked so serene and gentle in her nakedness, that it almost ceased to be indecent. Eugène Roucard, the great politician, felt that this nude bosom was even more eloquent than his speeches in the chamber, softer and more persuasive in making people relish the charms of the reign, in other words of the Second Empire, and in convincing the doubtful. He went up to his sister-in-law to compliment her on her happy stroke of audacity in lowering her bodice yet another inch. Almost all the corps législatif were there, and from the air with which the deputies looked at the young married woman, the minister foresaw a fine success on the morrow in the delicate matter of the loans of the city of Paris. It was impossible to vote against a power that raised on the compost of millions a flower like this Renée, a so strange flower of voluptuousness with silken flesh and statuesque nudity, a living joy that left behind it a fragrance of tepid pleasure. But what set the whole ballroom whispering was the necklace and the aigrette. The men recognised the jewels. The women furtively called each other's attention to them with a glance. Nothing else was talked about the whole evening. Well, this idea of fashion representing so many things and taking over completely from the issues underneath. And in fact, I would refer you again to the royal visit. No one questions what the heck these people are doing here or anything like that. It's all concentrated on what Kate wore, right? And I think this goes back to the 19th century. You get this very much. This is the political woman walking in, making her entrance. People have stopped. She's going to go straight through this group here. These people are actually looking in amaze and they've stopped their conversation. They're talking about her. What is her relationship to this man and so on. I thought it was a very good illustration of that passage. Well, I want to now sort of get on to underwear. And to start this, we will look at another painting by Manet, his painting of a courtesan, Nana, of course, relating to the book written by his friend Émile Zola. Now, this particular painting of Nana was based on Henriette Hauser, and also on Volteste de Labine. One was an actress and one was a courtesan. So in other words, you don't have here a virtuous bourgeois woman. You clearly have someone who works in voluptuousness and in seduction. And we know this because, of course, she is appearing in her underwear, all right? So the underwear, of course, is the halfway between being totally clothed and being totally naked. And it actually takes on this fetishism or fetishization of the flesh itself. And in fact, the underwear itself becomes what one aims at rather than the naked body underneath, which, after all, does then fall back into the role of nature. So here we have then, we know that this is something which has been put on for the pleasure of men, because we actually have this rather truncated character staring at it. So we are supposed to follow his view, and he's looking straight at the corset, and she's looking back at us. Now you can see here the way in which the corset actually deforms the body, pushes out the stomach, but that doesn't matter because at the time, of course, you've got a full skirt. At this time, in the 1870s, the corset has risen from just being something which kept you in place into becoming a piece of underwear that one occasionally would exhibit. However, no respectable woman would ever have a coloured corset, all right? And the women always had it in flesh colour, and it was usually in a linen, made of linen, because this was supposed to be something that would stand up to being washed and so on. So this corset was the blue, and the silkiness, speaking of the silkiness of her flesh, is clearly marks this woman as a prostitute. I'll come back to her pants in a minute. Now, this is this idea that basically, rather than actually having to indulge in buying a prostitute yourself, you can indulge in the sort of sexual encounter sort of vicariously by actually looking at corsets in windows. And this is this idea of voyeurism, and by the jerky nature of his umbrella, or you have a feeling about what's going on. All right, I'm sorry about this, Colin. Right. All right, well, we now have, how was the corset worn? Well, it started out, as I said, as a steel contraption worn by the aristocracy, and gradually is taken over in the 19th century by the new aristocracy of money, the bourgeoisie, all right? And so it, however, loses some of its rigidity. It's now made of whalebone, and it is worn always over the chemise. Now, the chemise is the closest thing to the flesh, and the chemise is actually developed out of the medieval sort of underskirt that everyone, men and women, wore. The chemise for men shortens and, of course, becomes a chemise, a shirt, all right? Whereas for women, it becomes separated at the end of the 19th century between the top, which is the corset, often, and pants. All right, so here we have, in 1876, a woman looking at herself getting dressed. This is the basic, most intimate part of her toilet. Now, I just wanted to sort of show you this idea of women at this time had to make themselves up. You know, this is, you know, if you actually think of the word makeup, you know, it really does tell you what it is. It's pretending. You are putting on a facade, just the way the city of Paris has put on a facade. So here you actually have another so again, showing this woman sort of hesitating at the moment between when she transforms herself from a natural, uncorseted, unmade up, uncoiffed body into the social body that she will be when she leaves her boudoir and goes out into the world. So she's seen at this moment with the dressing gown half off, putting on powder and so on. Now, I just wanted to very quickly sort of show the way in which painters play with this idea of chemises as showing intimacy. And to us, it just looks like a pile of clothes. But underneath here, we've got the dog actually sitting on a chemise. And so a woman to take off her chemise, how would I say it? It's a bit sort of like semi-porn. I don't know. It's, you know, would be extremely sort of revealing, you know, to have how would you have a picture that would give you the same experiences? It would probably be a woman possibly with her legs open or something. Do you know what I mean? That's the level of indecency that would be considered. Now, what you have here is that Renoir plays with this image of the naked and the nude. Now, this, of course, the way she's standing is like the Venus, the Pudenda Venus on the Capitoline Hill. All right, the classical statue of Venus always has a hand across her genitals, or sometimes across her breasts as well. And Renoir is playing with the ideal of the naked body. But he's brought it into the nude by the fact that she actually has a pile of clothes that she's taken off, and in fact she's taken them off right down to her chemise. All right, so when you're actually looking at these paintings, you really do need to look at the clothes often to see what is the significance. Now, the same thing is here with Rollo and Gervex. Here we have a very gendered female body. All right, she has no hair. All right, so she's as different from men as possible, a long way from nature and its dirtiness and sexuality and all of that. She has the waist, she has the breasts pushed far apart, but just in case we've missed the fact that she's undressed and not nude, he actually has foregrounded the corset here, all right? And it's a red corset showing that she's up to no good, and also you've got, she's obviously taken it off in a hurry, And there's the fellow's walking stick sort of sticking out from underneath. You really seriously, in a lot of these paintings, you need to look at the walking sticks that men have and how they're being handled and all the rest of it. Now this fellow, she's obviously a very good sleeper because he's got up, got dressed, and is about to jump out the window, and she's still sound asleep. I mean, I'd love to be able to sleep like that. Now this actually, I just want to look at corsets and the way they develop. Now this would be the morning corset, which wasn't as structured as the later corset. As the evening went on, the day went on, the corset became more and more constrictive, and it's finally when you actually go out in the afternoon that those who really do tight lace would pull the strings in and then become upright, highly strung and straight-laced. All right, now, this is the effect of straight lacing. Now, this would be extreme. They've actually measured the waist of a lot of these dresses that actually remain in the costume museums in Paris, and they've found that the majority of the waists actually are about 20 inches, which is not very thin. So therefore, in other words, probably not everyone straight-laced to that extent, though they probably would have on occasions. All right, so I want to actually look at the development of the corset in a moment. All right, now this is the normal organs, and this, of course, is what happens with straight lacing. Now, straight lacing is more or less permanent. It would start out when you were very, very young, and by the time you've reached your 30s or something, you would actually have that form. All right, it's not as though you just sort of pop out every time. Even if you were very fat, I suppose you would. But I mean, your form is actually moulded, and they've found sclerosis and different things in the bones of women. There's a lot of quite interesting research done on corseting. It's not supposed to have been as bad as we think. However, it did promote miscarriage because and it did also prolapse of organs, the uterus and things, because it pushes all of that down. All right, now when you're pushed in this far, it means that your intestines are relocated, which means you have all sorts of intestinal problems like constipation and all of that. Bladder problems, I would have pressed on that. But also, of course, you cannot breathe properly. You have to shallow breathe. This is the normal lungs, whereas here the lungs are constricted. And this, of course, is why women were always gasping for breath. You know, the sort of ultimate femininity is the heaving breast and the, and this was related to hysteria. And of course, they weren't actually hysterical; they couldn't catch their breath. So you actually had fainting rooms, often a small room which was nearby at balls where people could actually go and have their stays undone. And that's also when they start having the smelling salts, which is, the jolt. Is supposed to sort of make you take a deep breath and breathe again. So really, it's not just infantilizing women; it's making them incapable of normal movement. Also, the liver, in some cases, would actually grow extra lobes through the rib cage. All right? So it's certainly, this is extreme lacing, but it certainly is detrimental. Here we have examples of people with a machine for straightening, pulling in tiny waists. I just wanted to show you the moulding of the body. Now, this is before and after the corset. However, what you get here is actually already a corseted body. Do you see what I mean? She's already got the boobs separated, the large hips and the small waist. However, she puts the corset on, and there she is going out with full paraphernalia. So you can see it would be a very, very long process. Now, this is one of the reasons why you can see that the body shape and everything is different, is when you actually get costume dramas now, they never look quite right, because we no longer, even with the outer garments, we don't have the body shape that what you would have seen in these paintings. You know, for example, I don't know if you saw that Marie Antoinette, with that ridiculous woman romping through the entire thing in pink. All right, well, I mean, it didn't work at all, because she clearly was someone out of the 21st century, dressed up. The illusion was incomplete. All right, the important things about this is that your movements were totally stopped. You couldn't walk fast. There's a film which is on at the moment called The Invisible Woman, which looks at Dickens' mistress, and they have scenes of her striding along the beach, and 100 harems, men not being able to keep up with her. I mean, it's ridiculous. They clearly haven't researched costumes. Women didn't, a respectable woman didn't, just tried to know how to, but you couldn't. All right, so this is the way in which you actually become when you are corseted. Now, of course, this leads, again, I'm not going to have time to talk about this very much, I might talk about it next week, is the development of illnesses which relate to corseting, hysteria, of course, and all of the sort of things that are done to look at it. This is, of course, Charcot, who used to have his Tuesdays at the Salpêtrière Hospital, which specialised in looking at hysterical illnesses in women. He's the first person to do this, and he diagnosed these as all being sexually based, putting on ovary clamps and all the rest of it. And it's very interesting that one of the people who sat at his feet was Freud, who of course redevelops his theories differently, but again looks back to sexual traumatism as the basis of the unconscious and so on. All right, we'll look at that another time, but also this idea of women as mysterious creatures, as other, totally away. Here we have the rational, upright, greying haired, venerable male from the outside world. He's near us, and the woman, the pale, ill woman receding into the cushions, unfathomable. This is where you get the idea of the mysterious nature of women. They weren't mysterious at all, it's just that the way in which they were gendered at that time. All right, so again, now we have corsets now, of course, developed for absolutely everyone. They started out for the court, the royal courts in Spain. They then go to the French courts. Then they go to the upper bourgeoisie with the development of the shops. Now everyone can wear a corset. You can have one electrified, which actually gives you a little ping every now and again. I've never been able to work out how this works, but evidently it's good because they cure weak back, and the chest is aided in its healthy development. So I think everyone needs to rush out. Anyhow, what I have here, which is interesting, is the corset silhouette. Starting out in, I was from 1900, which is this S-bend, gradually becomes more and more pronounced until we get up to here, and we get round here to here. And what actually happens in 1914? It's the World War. It's the World War, isn't it? And women are called out to actually work, aren't they? Women actually, you can no longer afford to have the other half of the population sort of wooting and swooning and being different, and people suddenly discover that women can be useful, and they can't be particularly useful if they're in this sort of outfit. And so this then comes, you can see it is now elasticized, it actually covers the body, but it doesn't do anything like this at all. And this will be the corset which will be used by women who are working during the war. This is the Poiret. I won't have time. I just wanted to have a look at the 1950s silhouette. Now, some of you might remember this, all right? All right, this is, again, an extraordinarily gendered body. Now, this, of course, 1950 is when? It's after the Second World War, all right? Women in the Second World War were back in the factories creating ammunition. Finally, the soldiers come back. Well, for heaven's sake, we need the jobs. Women have to go back into the home. And so you need the gendered, fertile, feminine body. So this is exactly what you get. The tiny cinched-in waist, the brassiere, which pushes up the breasts, and emphasis on the hips. Also, interesting handbags. I mean, I want to do a history of a handbag one day. I think this is hilarious. Hollywood's Secret Revealed. So here we have, and the names are extraordinary. This is called Bachelors Beware. All right. And so this is then, you can actually have a discreet organdy top to sort of cover the bare shoulders. But notice it's very much the corseted, cinched waist with the breasts coming out and the big childbearing hips, all right? Because they really, all the baby boomers had to be born. This one is called Whistle-worthy. I mean, it is really cringe, isn't it, when you come to think of it? This one is the French poodle. This is Gay Paris, because we all know the French get round in underwear and nothing else. Actually, one lady from the other group sent me a wonderful photo that she'd taken in Rouen last year of a big store that had back to school with some pencils and every possible type of extraordinary underwear and gorgeous bras. And she said, gee, this certainly beats Dobson's, from the The French love underwear. You go into the Galerie Lafayette, there's an entire entire floor of nothing but underwear. So all of these then, I'm just trying to show you that the gendered body comes back. Now, we just get into underwear. Now, what makes this so titillating, you know, and why people, it wasn't accepted at the salon, it had to be exhibited elsewhere in a private gallery, was this woman actually in underpants, or in a kind of underpants. Now, underpants had developed from the Middle Ages onwards, from the kind of long chemise smock that people wore, and they began to be joined and turned into trousers, all right? And of course, it was only men who had these trousers. Women continued to have a kind of a shift and had nothing underneath, right? It's only at the time of crinolines that you even get any leggings on your legs at all. You wore nothing underneath at all. It must have been very breezy. But the idea of wearing the pants, of course, comes from this, because women did not wear pants. And it's only in the last 2 years ago that the Town Hall of Paris actually gave public authorisation or cancelled out the clause that said if women want to wear trousers in Paris, they have to have a special decree allowing them to do it. Right? This is something which had existed for years. It was, you know, it's cross-dressing. It was endangering this gender boundaries that I spoke to you before. So, in other words, you get this very titillating thing. Was now, because of the crinolines, as we'll see, you need some kind of covering to your leg. And so a woman in trousers, even though they're incredibly sort of fluffy and silky and everything, there's that little thrill of, you know, ooh, naughtiness in this. So there's a lot of eroticization of the female body. The titillation that we no longer see would have been very obvious to people looking at it at this time. So this is what actually happens at the time of the crinolines. Of course, with the springs, wind could get, and of course you would have all of your backside completely naked. So this is where you get the development of drawers, what we call drawers, which have a drawstring around the top, but which are completely do not come together at the bottom. Now, why? Can you imagine why? Because of course you couldn't possibly go to a toilet and also because, of course, under your chemise is held down by your corset, and that is pulling on your garters and things. So even if you didn't have something this big, how could you get there? And you'd have to take your corset off to actually get your pants down. So therefore, you just have a slot in between. And this was considered healthy anyhow, because women are sort of prone to hysteria, they're humid and all the rest of it. That's the way it should be. And it's only right at the end of the 19th century that you get the first trousers pulled together, when women start actually doing sport. This is just a woman on a toilet. I sort of thought, you never know what you're going to see when you come here. But here you can see she has actually no underpants, all right? And she just has the stockings and nothing else. She just pulled her dress up. But one of the reasons why they start developing pants is, of course, when you develop the show or the can-can, it was considered so, you know, rather scandalous, people sitting in the front row looking right up people's skirts, which was the reason they were there in the first place. So there is a whole police, part of the Napoleon III police force, which is the police de pudeur, who sit there and make sure that the girls are wearing underpants that have crutches, right? And that is the operative word. It wasn't just saying that they wore pants, it was that they had crutches. All right, I haven't left myself very much time at all. I just want to very quickly look at the burden of women, what they had to go through if you were a respectable upper-class woman in the way of changing your clothes. Well, you would get up in the morning, have the half-day corset on, and you would be in this peignoir, which is a kind of very, very elaborate sort of dressing gown. In a lot of literature, you get occasionally your lover would appear at this time because your husband's gone out to work, and there was extremely sort of erotic sort of sensations, you know, of the boudoir. In fact, if you want to read this sort of scene, you can read The Kill by Zola, where Renée appears in her peignoir and the sort of with her fresh flesh sort of can be seen and smelt through. She may have had a bath at the time. So this is actually a very interesting painting that I might comment on another time. But it clearly is. We look at it as someone in a rather shapeless dress. In actual fact, the the fact that she's there supposes that there is a man actually watching her, all right, and even the fact that she's holding his monocle here. So all of these paintings have this sort of flirtatiousness that you miss completely if you look at it just as a painting of a woman. Now, by the middle of the day, she would have changed into something where she would receive people for morning visits. And this usually, as you can see, this has evolved out of the gaulle that Marie Antoinette wore, sort of out of soft muslin. She's by now corseted. There's extraordinary underwear. It would have taken hours and hours and hours to actually do up these bows. One thing that was actually interesting last year, there was an exhibition at the Art Décoratif looking at underwear, corsetry through the ages, and at the end of it they actually had some of these corsets and these things that you could put on just to try them on, and you have no idea how long it would take to put them on, and the time to get them off, you know, they actually showed a picture of seduction, you know, with the fellow undoing bows and undoing things and undoing the hooks, you know, and then putting it up there and then out comes the hair. I mean, the concentration, I mean, you know, it would have taken 5, 6 or 7 minutes to actually get through the bow. Very interesting sort of love lives they must have had. All right, so here we have the favourites of Renoir, this idea of femininity, women sort of shown in the boudoir doing what women should do, which is playing the piano and so on. Again, the simple white muslin dress, white of course the colour of purity. We then have the afternoon dress. Now by now she will be dressed up for the very few times, even in the 1870s, when she can go out. And this will be to go to the cemetery. So here I have the Parisienne by Manet in black, which was usually for mourning, as we'll see next week, not necessarily. Clothed from head to feet, gloved with the accessories. So she could be going to the cemetery, she could be going legitimately to go out for tea, and again dressed up, this is Marie Cassatt, with the hat and the muff and the, at least the ruffle and the gloves. Or she could be going out for a little walk with her dog. Now, as I think a lot of you have been through my lectures where the dog symbolises femininity, this idea of futility. You know, this dog can't work, right? It can't hardly even bark. It's just a play thing. This is what it reflects the status of women: devoted, loyal, fairly useless, obedient, submissive. Perfect. This is exactly what she's supposed to be, and the loneliness of the boudoir means that the only person she can relate to is not the guy on there, but the little dog. Now, changing constantly would take up your day. You know, if you look at a diary, constantly getting in and out because you had different corsets and so on. You didn't change your chemise, by the way, very often for any reason at all. Yeah. Anyway, it was just kept on, and it was used for everything. The idea of this time, of course, one didn't wash. You know, people, and it was the chemise that took the dirt, and it would be washed eventually. When women even started to take baths, they submersed themselves usually with their chemise on. So anyhow, fashion develops this style where you actually have, for the going out in the afternoon, you have the tailored top with the skirt, and then you can take that off and then put a bodice on the same skirt to go out in the evening or for dinner. All right, so you get a sort of a ways around this. Now, by early evening, for a dinner party or one which was in the home still, you have high dress. By now you have extreme, the corseting would be pulled right in. Great expanses of bosom to show off jewels. This is one of the reasons why you had the décolleté, which didn't seem to be of a worry. You know, when you're out in the street, you're totally covered from head to foot. But by the time you actually get to the opera or to a ball, you have great expanses of bosom, all the more to show the jewels that show your status, to show your husband's wealth, and so on. You also have, in many of these paintings, reference to paraphernalia, particularly of gloves, hats, umbrellas, little tiny bags, handbags, reticules, because of course women, what did you need? You didn't have a mobile phone, you had no money to spend. You couldn't comb your hair because you had everything in it. What did you need? Probably a little bit of makeup. So you have these tiny little handbags. And then I love going to the op shops and getting these 1920s or 1950s handbags. And they're tiny because all, of course, a 1950s lady had was a mirror for her lipstick and a comb. Because, of course, she didn't drive, probably, and, she had no wallet and she had no phone. And it really, handbags relate very much to women's role. Anyhow, women actually, because of the corseting and the tightness of the bodice and also the tightness of their gloves, often had problems with circulation. So often they would have to sort of do movements like this to get the circulation going. And so this is where you get the heaving bosom and the fluttering fingernails and, and the fluttering eyelashes, all as part of this panoply of female behaviour. Now, of course, a man doesn't do that, does he? In fact, he's strong, intelligent and all the rest of it. He's not confined in these body-changing corsets and so on. The fan, of course, had its own language. Open meant, yes, I'm available, what do you mean? There's a whole language of fans by which these women managed to communicate. Now, just very, very quickly, I might go 5 minutes over, want to look at the evolution of fashion from about the middle of the century. All right, so you get the huge crinoline in the 1855s. By 1866, Worth, and particularly Princess Metternich, who was a great friend of Eugénie, start a new fashion which is moving the width of the crinoline from the sides to the back. All right, and that basically is going to be the fashion which will last right up into the 20th century. All right, so you're getting the beginning of this emphasis of the backside as opposed to the width of the clothing. So that this is one which was made by Worth, as you can see. The silhouette has changed. You still have to have an extremely cinched waist and a pushed up bosom to match the enormous backside that comes out here. And the train now exhibits the wealth of material as opposed to the sides of the dress. Now, to keep this up, you had to have these things which were tied round you, which are bustles. Now, these would be made out of horsehair and tied here, and it would stick out the back. Now, I've actually got examples of the different types of bustles. This would be for during the day. This would be possibly for the evening, but some of them are much more constructed than others. Some of them are very dainty. Some of them, being undressed and you come across this iron cork, thing, it'd be a bit, disconcerting. All right. So this is a painting which has been done from a dress that they actually, in 1881, but they still remarkably have the dress that was used as the model in the Galleria Museum. And this, of course, would have used this particular type of bustle, which is extremely confining. If you think of that in comparison to the crinoline, where you can move, even if you had to walk pigeon-toed to make it move entrancingly, this now is encased, and it's very hard for you with a corset here, high heels pushing you forward, and this restricting your body movement, that women had movements that were very robotic in many ways. Right? Litheness was impossible. All right, so I just want to give you an example of a dress which was made by Worth. All right, Worth is the great couturier of the time, along with eventually Paquin and Doucet, and he, of course, dresses all the aristocracy. Now, he was an incredibly talented man. All of the women of high society were all invited to the same balls, and they all wanted a Worth. And of course, you were supposed to always be dressed in white. So extraordinary ingenuity on his part of getting different whites and different materials and making them different enough to please these prima donnas. And so here you can see the different shades or different tones of white and ribbons and so on. Now, of course, this style is diffused throughout the world by the catalogues of the Grand Magasin. And by 1875, Eugénie has already gone into exile, but the style that she's pioneered has been taken up by the women of the Third Republic. And you're now getting clothes that are more and more confining and more moulding and more constricting. As you approach the end of the century, where anxiety about the status of France becomes higher. All right, and don't forget, in 1870, the French had been beaten to a pulp by the Prussians. And of course the same thing virtually will happen in 1914. The Germans are looking bigger, there's more of them, they are more industrialised and so on. So in many ways this constriction of the body, this idea of conforming to stereotypes becomes more important with this idea of national identity. I just wanted to give you a painting example of that style with Berthe Morisot and her sister. By 1878, there is less material, but the skirt is getting tighter and tighter, as you can see, and pulled around the knees. So you're really hobbled completely. It's a very difficult dress in which to do anything, and forget about sort of going to the loo, excuse me for saying so, but I mean it's very, very difficult. That's why, of course, trousers had to be the way the underpants were. 1880, still the same style, but what has happened here is that the bodice has been lowered into this princess line thing, so not only is it there, it now confines you there, and you're pulled at the back. Here we have the best example of that in the Tissot painting is this evening with this woman who's clearly a courtesan with this very much older man in this extraordinary yards and yards of material. She would have had wire around her neck, and the headdresses that they're starting to wear now will become more and more elaborate and will require swathes of false hair as well. So that I actually had a cartoon, I couldn't find it, of a fellow looking at before and after and what he'd got in a bride, and by the time he'd taken off the bustle and taken off, because they also had false springs in the corset, so that if you didn't have a chest, they bounced, the springs pushed you up and down. It looked as though you had. So he took out the springs, he took out the corset, he took out the backside, and then of course takes out the false hair, and there's nothing left. I get back to the point that I made in the opening slides, this importance of artificiality, which had nothing to do with sensuality in many ways, but the more constructed you were, the more you were a social construction. All right, and I thought this was a very good example of fashion echoing the city of Paris. All right, we saw with the crinolines the way that the size and the ornamentation echoed the Opera House. In 1889, at the 1889 World Exhibition, of course, you get the Eiffel Tower, which is constructed in a very sort of in a metallic form, and this woman looking at it is not unlike the tower in her own way. She has a metallic form within her. She's extremely upright. She's constricted, and she starts small and goes out bigger at the bottom. All right. Now, just towards the end, the ultimate constriction would probably be the S-bend corset, which develops at about 1900 and worked for about 10 or 13 years. I don't know if you remember, if you have pictures of your grandmothers wearing this style. This means that the body is not just constricted, but it's pushed forward like that, so that you're going to develop a kind of sclerosis of the spine. And it's extremely difficult to actually breathe properly and walk around like that. To emphasise the tiny nature of the waist, the skirt is evased or pushed out at the bottom, and enormous hats are worn. This is the time, I don't know, the Edwardian era, with these, and they were heavy. They were heavy. So you're standing like this enormous thing on your head, and also false hair as well to maintain it, because you really needed a lot of hair to be able to get enough hat pins in to keep that in position. And to make the whole thing smooth, you actually have the breast flattened as well. All right? So I'm not sure we actually have this. This is the Bon Marché, who now makes corsets for everyone. And by now, I think there's something like 10,000 women making corsets in Paris. Right? It had become one of the major elements. It's sort of every woman had to have a corset. So you can see the way in which the angle on which she is pushed, sort of the way in which she's flattened out here, but pushed forward and back, and then you get the stays and things that come down and support the pull up the stockings. She would still may not have underpants with a crutch. And of course the stockings go on here, and this is the chemise, which is underneath. All right, and it still appears underneath. Can you see See that? It only disappears at the time of the First World War. Now, I wanted to finish with this aspect, because we're all sitting here congratulating ourselves, thinking, wasn't it bad back then? I wanted to look in particular at Barbie, who developed, to my surprise, in 1959. I didn't realise that she'd been around for so long. And she, of course, exhibits, if you forget about the legs, she exhibits the 1950s silhouette, the childbearing, theoretically, childbearing, the tiny waist, which is a hangover from the corsetry of the beginning of the 20th century, the very large breasts, which have become fashionable and still are fashionable, except in France, where you can't get anything, that's just my own problems, but all right, so that, but she also, the legs have become incredibly elongated. Now this, of course, is impossible. If she stood up, she'd fall over, she'd fall forward. All right, now no one has legs like that, and of course they are accentuated now by this eroticisation of legs, and they are accentuated by high heels. And this is a relatively recent Barbie doll from a catalogue that I got, where it looks as though we have an androgynous person, which was absolutely unthought of course, at the time when we began this lecture. This idea of separate spheres, which had to, the appearances of people in these separate spheres had to maintain social order. Androgynous was impossible. Well, now it looks a bit as this has happened, but is it really that? In fact, you now have another impossible body, all right? And the legs have developed. People now are wearing, young women are wearing heels like this. Forget about, women's liberation. No one would burn their bra. They're now getting back into corsets. The number of corset salons that have sprung up in Paris, and while I was doing research on this, looking at corsetry, the number of blogs and things about people, how you adjust your corset and so on. And all the goths, of course, go in for this as well. But I suppose the real point here is that one no longer needs a corset, an external corset, because we now have the internal corset, which is the diet. All right, and everyone this is pushed at us and pushed at women from the television, from every possible angle. So this really is the new body shape, but it's entirely up to women, again, to maintain it. Women are always responsible for social order. Thank you very much.